Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Okay, welcome back to my channel everybody. Today's video is a really fun one. This is the fantasy romance reader tag. This was created by Hannah. I will have her YouTube channel linked down below, and I will have everybody else who's participating either linked in a playlist or I'll have their channels linked down below, so make sure you go and check everybody out. This is such a fun one. If you love fantasy romance, you're going to find some great people and some great books to talk about. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So Hannah came up with a bunch of questions. There are 11 questions. We're going to go through them, and I'm very excited about this. So the first question is, what book got you into fantasy romance for the first time? So the book that I remember getting me into fantasy romance isn't even actually a fantasy romance. It's Beauty by McKinley, which I believe is a middle grade book, or maybe it's not middle grade, maybe it is YA, I don't even remember. It's quite old as well. I read this when I was a kid, like 6th grade. I remember reading this because it was on the accelerated reader list, and I was, voraciously going through that. So I picked this book up. It is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. McKinley is a fabulous storyteller. I mean, if you're familiar with fantasy at all, you know who McKinley is, but all of her books are just impeccably well done. But this was the first book I read from her. Some of her books get quite dark, and I'm glad that 6th grade me didn't read them. But this one was just fantastic. Beauty and the Beast retelling that does at times stick pretty closely to the animated Disney version, which is probably one reason why I loved it so much, because I adored that movie when I was a kid. So that was technically the first book that got me into fantasy romance, but if you're talking about when I really hardcore got into it, another book that I can think of is Graceling by Kristen Cashore. I found this book before I even was chronically online. Before I was online, before I was part of an online book community, I was searching just the bookstore shelves for books to read, and this one caught my eye. It was like she had different color eyes, and it was basically that if you have a grace, you have this special gift, and the heroine's gift is killing. That's her grace. She's just an incredible killer, and so she's an assassin basically, and the romance in here felt very mature to me. I didn't read this as a YA as a teen, I read this as an adult, but I absolutely loved this book, and I still think it holds up. I would actually really love to reread it, because I haven't read it other than those first few years when I found it, and then I was rereading it because I couldn't find anything else that was hitting quite like this, and it just was fantastic. So that was probably the first book that I remember as an adult really sparking my interest in fantasy romance. I mean, paranormal romance is kind of different because I was reading J.R. Ward before I found Graceling and things like that, but for fantasy romance, this was the one that I was like, this is incredible, so I love that one. And then moving right along, another book that really got me good was City of Bones by Cassandra Clare, and this started an entire obsession with Shadowhunters, largely because of the romance. I still feel like Cassandra Clare writes incredible romances with so much longing and angst, and I eat her books up. I love them. The Clockwork Angel series I still think is one of the most beautiful romances I've ever read, and I also really like her world building. She's just a favorite of mine. I feel like I bring her up all the time, and City of Bones, just clicked something in my brain, this whole idea of living in an urban setting and having this fantastical world, and the women in the world are also very strong and they can be warriors, and I loved it. I loved it so much. And then moving right along, so probably at that point, I was still reading a lot of YA. Another book that I really got into, which sort of was a bridge, I feel like, between young adult and adult. So this is technically categorized as a YA, but I think that's because it was published before New Adult was a thing. This book was published in 2011, and I read it at that time, and it is Smokeless Fire by S. Young. I can't remember what name she puts on the title, but it's Samantha Young, basically, the contemporary romance author. This book I just found when I was browsing Kindle, and I had just barely gotten a Kindle for the first time in 2011. And I was really interested in fantasy books, and I saw this one and just picked it up. So this book was basically a Middle Eastern type of fantasy with heavy on the romance, and it is based around jinns and genies. It was so unique. I hadn't read anything like it at the time, and I just loved and adored it. So that was probably the bridge book. And also, that was also before fantasy romance was really a thing. Like, I've been reading for my whole life, always been drawn to fantasy books, and, as I grew up, like, beauty was my awakening, probably, to anything romantic. I looked for romance blended into the fantasy book, so any fantasy book that had a hint of romance, I was like, oh my gosh! Like, I remember reading the part in the Lord of the Rings trilogy about Aragorn and Arwen, and if you've read the books, it's like, and just being like, so now that fantasy romance is a thing, I'm very happy, but I also definitely have higher standards now, so, okay. So question number 2 is, if you could pick one fantasy world to move to for the rest of your life, which would it be? So for me, this one is another YA, but I feel like it's just the most beautiful and amazing fantasy world that I would love to live in, and it is the Daughter of Smoke and Bone world by Laini Taylor. I think it just sounds so magical, and even though, like, there's a war there, and, like, you have mortal enemies, like, I still just want to go there. I want to go there and live there. I want to be a chimera so badly. And of course, like, I put Shadowhunters in here because, again, like, I love how the women can be warriors. I love how the women have almost, like, equal power to the men, that they're, they're respected in the community. They're, they're not, like, a third-class citizen type of thing in there. So I love the Shadowhunter world, always and forever will. And, another one, of course, which I think is the obvious answer, which will come up a lot, is Volaris in A Court of Mist and Fury. Like, who wouldn't want to live there, right? Okay, number 3 is, if you could partner with one bookish hero heroine, who would it be? So for a male partner, I would definitely pick Atreus, who is a hero in a new book, Slaying the Vampire Conqueror by Carissa Broadbent. I loved this book specifically because of the hero. He had the capacity for great violence and power, but he had this heart of gold, and not that he was soft, but he had this very strong moral center and this desire to, put his people first, and I just love and admire that in a hero so much, and I loved him, and yeah, he was giving me Aragorn vibes big time. And for the female partner I would like to be partnered with, it would be Yvonne from A Heart of Blood and Ashes, who is so incredibly strong. Even though she has a disability, she has this spine of steel, an iron will, and she is clever and smart, and she knows how to get work done, and I just think she would be an incredible partner to have. Okay, so now this next one is, if you could be one fantasy creature, mythical being, what would you be? And I think that I would probably want to be, if I could be one mythical creature, what would I would want to be a mermaid, or a siren, for sure, or a selkie. Like, I am truly fascinated with those 3 types of mythical creatures, and they're a little bit difficult to find books about them. This book is about a selkie, but the male, and it's a YA book, but it's so beautiful, and the male is the selkie. And some myths and legends, women can't be selkies, so then they're sirens or mermaids or whatever, but anything like that. I would love to be that for sure. If you could kill one fantasy romance character, who would it be? So, for some of these, I really tried to pick books that I didn't mention before, and I think that for a lot of these answers, because A Court of Mist and Fury is kind of the gold standard for a lot of fantasy romance readers, you could pick any of them for any of these questions, but I decided to go with Rasputin from Anastasia by Sophie Lark. I love that fantasy romance. I think it's rich in world building and history and great characterization, and I love the romance, and that villain in there, and specifically combined with what happens to Anastasia's family in real life history, is just like, I would want to off him. He would be a goner. Okay, number 6 is, what fantasy romance character do you truly believe would be your in real life best friend? So for me, I think I would be right about this. I think it would be Louvain from Entreat Me. I feel like, so this is Grace Draven's Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I feel like such a sense of kinship with her. I feel a lot of, empathy for her. I felt like her character was really well written. I found her to be very relatable, and I just feel like, her and I would be pals. I think we could definitely be besties in real life, for sure. Okay, the next question is, what would be your fantasy weapon of choice? So, if we're going with just a weapon, I would have to say a sword. Like, I would want to be a bad A sword-wielding maiden, 100%. I think that would be amazing. And I think a sword would be fun for a woman, too, because that would imply that you would have to be pretty strong to wield a sword. And also kind of unexpected. I feel like there aren't a lot of women who have swords, you know, so that's what I would pick. Okay, and number 8 is, who is the most appealing fantasy romance character of all time? So, I think that, you know I said I wasn't going to mention books I'd already mentioned, but I really feel like one for me has got to be Jace Herondale. Like, those books will always have a chokehold on me, and I just love his character. I think he's very complicated, angst puppy, wonderful. I don't really care what anybody thinks. I love Jace Herondale always and forever. So him for sure. And a new one that I really, really love is Maxentarius from the Daughter of No World series by Carissa Broadbent. I think he's, again, another very honorable man who always wants to do what's right and who is a little bit tortured, and just his relationship with Tizana was so beautiful. I love how he was constantly thinking of her, and the way, like, the last 2 books when things got hard and they got separated and just like, oh, it just like did things to me, and I loved watching him fight his way back to his love, and it was just so beautiful. So I really like him. And then, of course, Azriel. He's my favorite. He's my favorite from the ACOTAR series, so. Okay, the next one is pick one fantasy romance book to burn. Okay. Honestly, I could choose a lot. But I won't. I'll choose one. And the one I choose is Zodiac Academy. I hate that freaking book so much. It is garbage. I absolutely despise it. I'm sorry if you like it, but it's literally trash. And that is one of those books that I truly do not understand the hype at all. I don't understand how anyone could get through it. It's just, I hate it. Burn it. But, you know, the right answer is obviously, even though I think that book is terrible and a waste of time, like, I don't want to burn books, right? Never. So, like, if you like it, read it. At least you're reading. Okay, question number 10 is, you can choose one fantasy romance book. It's the only book you'll ever be able to read again. What is it? So for me, I really thought about this a lot, and I picked one that not only had characters that I had come to really love and care about, but that also seemed to really speak to me on a deep, like, soul level. So for me, this book is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. I, again, feel a lot of kinship with Nesta. I know she's a very unlikable character to some people, irredeemable to some people. I feel a lot of sympathy for her, and I think that she has one of the best character arcs in the whole series. I think she's one of the most interesting, and I have a little bit of an affinity for prickly, unlikable heroines who aren't perfect, and they make mistakes, and sometimes they make the same mistakes over and over again, but eventually they win. And I really love that type of character journey. And I also really loved what this book had to say about depression and how that feels and finding comfort and solace. And I love that book. It really, really spoke to me. So if I could only read one for the rest of my life, I would read that one. Okay, number 11 is, if you could recommend one fantasy romance book to a reader new to the genre, what would it be? This is an easy one. I would recommend Sword Heart by T. Kingfisher. I love this book. It is so fun. It is very engaging. The writing style is very easy to get into. The world building is light, but also very effective, and you never feel lost in the world. I think the characters are really likable, and I love the dynamic. I think the plot is easy to follow. I just adore this book as a whole, and I think this would be a really great pick for somebody who's just looking to get into fantasy romance. Okay, that's it. That is all of the questions. I really enjoyed making this video. I hope you all enjoyed my answers, and I'm sorry if you're a fan of Zodiac Academy. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Please excuse the dogs barking. If you made it this far, please leave me a unicorn emoji because fantasy. And I'll see y'all in my next one.